It was always a man's car.
Like a jukebox on wheels.
It's got more grunt.
Makes me feel like I'm on top of the world.
Ice cream and candy floss pink.
The scrapyards liked them. They were full of them.
It was a beautiful family car. The Vauxhall company in its very early days made tugboat engines. I mean, it was called the Vauxhall Ironworks then. It was on the Thames in the Vauxhall Bridge area of London. And like most companies in those days that were in engineering, these newfangled cars became a centre of attention. So they turned their hand to making a simple car, which they did, and that was produced in 1903. So that was the first Vauxhall. Then in 1905, the business was growing. They actually moved out to Luton, out into the country as it then was. And then they entered an era where really Vauxhall became one of the great luxury marques. And this all occurred because of the emergence of a very brilliant young engineer called Lawrence Pomeroy. And he produced a car called the Prince Henry, after the Prince Henry of Prussia trials, where the car was very, very successful in competition. Well, the Prince Henry was one of the most important cars for Vauxhall in the early days, and it really started as a competition car, quite literally. Competitions of those days very much sold cars, so the Prince Henry of Prussia trials were the great event, and this was really just a case of getting from A to B with a degree of reliability. I mean, speed even wasn't the essence. The roads were grim, everything was pretty diabolical, so it was being there at the finish that counted. Pomeroy designed this car specifically for this particular competition. It had a very radical V grille, as we would call it nowadays, a V radiator, which made the car look extremely handsome and extremely rakish. From there was spawned a whole bunch of great sporting cars and really great luxury cars, and I think that surprises a lot of people nowadays to know that Vauxhall really was up there with Rolls-Royce and Bentley as the provider of some of the most mouth-watering machinery that was available in the 20s and 30s. The clientele was obviously very rich, and mainly people that could afford to buy what was a very expensive chassis and then have a very expensive bespoke body put on it. And really the Vauxhall sales network spread into some of the most surprising places. One of our biggest export territories was Russia, and the Imperial House in Russia, the Romanovs, were regular users and had a huge garage, or stable I guess in those days, of Vauxhall cars. And we had mechanics and sales representatives in Moscow and in St. Petersburg servicing this sort of clients.
In 1914, Mr. Higginson, who was the manufacturer of the Autovac, which was like the petrol pump of modern times, it supplied engines with fuel, very important man, and he needed a car to win at Shelsley Walsh, which was a hill climb in Worcestershire and was the leading competition event of that particular time. Well, Vauxhall Motors undertook to make him this car, and believe it or not, in 3 months they produced the first 3098. It's the sort of thing you couldn't do these days, because you can't design a car from scratch in 3 months, including the chassis, the engine, and all the running components. So Vauxhall Motors did what was then an amazing feat, an impossible feat now. It would outperform anything else on the road when you consider that the normal cars were Austins, Morrises, Clinos and things like that, with a maximum speed of about 55 or at the most 60 miles an hour. The 3098 was guaranteed by the company to do 100 miles an hour, but you had to loan it back to them for a couple of days while they prepared it for this event. And they took the windscreen off, perhaps they maybe took the headlights off and that sort of thing. But it would do 100 miles an hour, and they gave you a certificate to prove it. It was always a man's car. It was the man of the house's car. He would drive it normally on the roads. He'd go to the office or do whatever he had to do with it. At the weekends, he could easily take it and perform well at places like Brooklands in a sprint or a short race, and drive it back home again with no trouble at all. My own car ownership started with Austin Sevens and Bullnose Morrises, and I eventually got up to a Bentley, a 3-litre Bentley, which I liked that very much. But then I bought this car here in 1969 and ran this car and the Bentley together for about 3 years. One had to go, and this car I kept because it seemed to be a better car. It got what we call, it's got more grunt. It takes off the mark better. And so we kept this car instead of the Bentley. It must have been the best car Vauxhall ever made.
1925 was a really momentous year, a watershed year for the Vauxhall Motor Company, because that was the year that General Motors of the United States bought Vauxhall. I'm not sure they knew what they were buying, but certainly General Motors had this impression that they wanted to get a foothold into Europe, and at the time Vauxhall was struggling, and the two came together. And I think probably just as well, because in the recession of the 30s, I guess it's doubtful that Vauxhall could have survived making just purely luxury cars. Now, of course, General Motors had aspirations to build cars literally for everyone. And the first manifestation of that was in 1931 when a brand new small Vauxhall came out, the Vauxhall Cadet. And that was sensational. Here was a hitherto luxury car manufacturer now making cars that literally everyone could afford. Now, by the time we arrive at the 10-4, Vauxhall was a mass producer of motor cars and a very serious competitor in the United Kingdom market. If you look at the 10-4, it's got a number of very novel features. For a start, it's the first car in the United Kingdom to have a unitary construction body, or what we might call nowadays a monocoque. It's also got an overhead valve engine, it's got independent front suspension, it's got hydraulic brakes, and it's the first production car to offer metallic paint.
On the roads of every motoring country in the world now run the two new models of the famous Vauxhall company, the 2¼ litre Velox and its younger brother, the 1½ litre Wyvern. Both embody all the latest features of the high-class motor car. The independent suspension system is progressive, automatically meeting surface conditions. Obviously, there's loads of room for luggage. The trunk also accommodates the spare wheel. Note the press-button fuel filler cap. The screen wipers, when switched off, automatically rest at the bottom of the screen, thus overcoming one of the minor annoyances of motoring.
After the war, we started to make some cars, start with the L-Type, but principally the first car where I think people really go, wow, and look at some of our cars, is the Vauxhall Wyvern. It came out in 1953, and it was the first car where not only did we have North American engineering, but plainly we had North American styling, and my father had one, and I can remember being enormously proud of this car and polishing all the chrome, of which it has quite a lot. It was an amazing car. It drove very well. It was a beautiful family car, but it had that North American sparkle, and of course in the 50s and indeed in the 60s, the United States was where it was at with car design.
This factory planned to build a car utterly new, yet worthy of a long history of fine engineering. Better than anything that had gone before, different from all the others. A car that would look ahead from 1958. But England can't provide all the testing grounds that modern car designers need. So they put their prototypes in an air freighter and headed them for the autobahns and rugged mountains of Europe. It's lucky these men are good drivers as well as good development engineers. See what I mean?
This is the Vauxhall Cresta, PA, 1958. It's the oldest known one in the world. When the public first bought these cars, I think they thought they were film stars themselves. Big bloody Yanks and chewing gum, yang, yang. I don't particularly like the Yanks, but I like the cars. Lots of chrome, like a jukebox on wheels. Fins sticking up at the back, Batman. Some of the real unusual things about the car was the curved glass. It's a proper American idea. And the early one like this had 3 rear windows. Belt your knee every time you open the door. That was good, you never forgot that. That was good, that was. Especially if you'd had a couple of pints of beer, it sort of sobered you up a bit. You know, it was good, that one. And then, of course, the lovely big back seat, if you sort of picked up a girl, you was sort of all right there, you know, as well.
Surely this is a great day for any family. The finer the car, the sweeter the joy. And there are no sweeter lines in fine cars than this new Vauxhall Cresta shows. This is motoring in the modern shape, graced in the colours of tomorrow, set off in its distinctive style by bright work of chrome and stainless steel. This is the shape that is low, wide and handsome.
Vauxhall have marketed themselves very contradictorily. If you take the 50s, where they produced these ice cream and candy floss pink cars, modelled on obviously GM in America, they then marketed them to the roast beef and Yorkshire pudding and the pipe smoking brigade. And unlike most other family cars, they included large numbers of people in their advertising, and the people are ultra respectable. So you get grey-haired businessmen, golf clubs, sitting inside bright pink Cadillac-styled PA Vauxhalls. You get respectable ladies with white gloves loading luggage and shopping into the back of early Victors. And there is no reference to the exciting styling, no reference to the transcontinental elements of the style at all in the brochures. They were almost perhaps ashamed of their styling and trying to pretend that you could still be very traditionally British and buy these extravagant and exuberant cars.
Here's finger light control. Here's boldness in the details that count for so much. Here's a safe car with the unequal vision of a panoramic screen. Easy to park with full-width rear vision. Satisfying in its interior appointments, especially in my lady's critical esteem.
Everybody loved these cars, but the rust, tin worm, what we call that, rust, I suppose, terrible. Especially the back wings used to nearly fall off, used to flap along the road. The petrol filler, another thing, there's a little drain, water drain there, and they used to block up, and then the water used to fill up the petrol tank. So, you know, when you was ready to go, you couldn't bloody go nowhere. I like Vauxhalls because they're different. You know, everybody wring their heads off when you drive past. Nothing like it today on the road. The modern plastic rubbish don't appeal to me at all. This is the ultimate machine.